Welcome to our panel discussion on Twilight, Los Angeles 1992 by Anna Deavere Smith. I'm your moderator, Eric J. Morgan. I'm an associate professor in the Democracy and Justice Studies and History programs at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. Joining me today are Alan Kopischke, director and associate lecturer in theater and dance, Cory J. O'Donnell, actor and UWGB student, Aisa Rogers, actor and also UWGB student, and Stacie Christian, Director of Inclusive Excellence and the Pride Center. Thank you all for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
On March 3rd, 1991, Rodney King, a 25-year-old Black man, was beaten by Los Angeles Police Department officers during his arrest for drunk driving following a high-speed highway chase. An uninvolved bystander filmed the incident from his nearby balcony and sent the footage to a local news station. The footage showed an unarmed King on the ground being beaten after initially evading arrest. News media around the world covered the incident, and King's beating caused a public furor. The officers were charged with the use of excessive force. King's beating ignited a national dialogue on the issues of both racial inequality and police brutality. 1 year later, the 4 officers were acquitted of the charges by a trial jury. The jury included 7 men and 5 women, none of them Black. After the verdict on April 29, 1992, rioting and looting broke out throughout the Los Angeles metropolitan area. On the 3rd day of the riots, Rodney King himself appealed to the rioters, pleading, "People, I just want to say, can't we all get along?" By the time the riots ended on May 4th, 63 people had been killed, thousands more had been injured and arrested, and property damage tallied over $1 billion, with the ethnic enclave of Koreatown particularly affected. After the events, actor and playwright Anna Deavere Smith interviewed a diverse array of 300 people concerning their opinions and analysis of the Los Angeles riots. The result of those interviews was the play, Twilight, Los Angeles 1992, which premiered in New York City in 1994, with Smith portraying every character. Twilight was nominated for the 1994 Tony Award for Best Play. Now let's turn to our discussion. All right, everyone. So in the wake of George Floyd's death last summer, and the widespread protests across the United States demanding racial justice and criminal, it's difficult to think of a more relevant play for us to discuss in this moment than Twilight. While the arrest and beating of Rodney King and the ensuing Los Angeles riots occurred nearly 20 years ago, how did those events, as well as how they are depicted in Twilight, continue to resonate with us today?
Well, all right, I'll jump in. Tragically, things are way too similar to what they were 30 years ago. A lot of what we saw this summer really paralleled what happened 30 years ago. Although I think this was one of the first instances of kind of wild video captured. Prior to this, you saw news organizations having a camera on site somewhere where something was expected perhaps to happen. This was just a guy in his apartment shooting video out his window when he saw something happen. And so it brought an immediacy that we hadn't seen before to these kinds of incidents. And I think that's why it caught so much attention and sparked such reaction. In some ways, we've become almost numbed to this, but again, there was another level of immediacy brought to the George Floyd incident and others this summer that I think, I hope, have brought us to a new level of awareness and urgency to action.
I concur with what Alan says in some way. What's important to understand is that 20 years ago, it was filmed and it was just one person filming it. Today, there's many people that realize how important it is to record this, because when you are watching as an individual, even from different areas, and they're filming this, you can see different versions of what is happening for people in the streets when they're getting arrested, when they're getting pulled aside. And It's interesting because I am a child of the 60s and we thought that things would be cured by now. That was kind of an ignorance that we had for many of us in the 60s. And somehow people knew it'd be cured. We woke up to that it's something that continues to occur, but without people videotaping it, no one really becomes a witness because it's forgotten. And so I think that's what's real important about this is the fact what Alan was saying, that it was videotaped. And then now that people are looking at videotape, and there's many tapes of all the occasions that occur, it wasn't just seen as one occurrence, but it happens often.
I think we do forget, not that it was an analog world in 1991 and 1992, but it was certainly a different world, as none of us had video cameras in our pockets, right? And so I think we forget at how different of a world it was in terms of the ability to even capture these moments. And I think Alan made a great point about the lack of spontaneity in terms of being able to capture moments both good and bad. And I don't want to say that your generation was ignorant, Stacie. Perhaps perhaps overly optimistic, but I think ignorant's a little harsh. All right, I want to turn to Alan for a couple of questions about the play, so our audience can learn a bit more about the background and the approach that you were using as the director. So Twilight premiered at the Court Theater in New York City in 1994. And it was originally a one-woman play written and performed by Anna Deavere Smith. Alan, as the director, what has your approach been to integrating more characters into this performance?
Sure. Yeah. And Anna was the only one who performed this for quite some time. And then I think she directed a production with two women taking on the roles. And since then, it has been done many times with multiple people in the roles. And in particular, colleges have put, half dozen, a dozen or more people in the roles. It's a huge task to take on, and Anna is masterful. But to ask students who are devoting a lot of time to other classes to take on the whole thing would be really beyond. And also it gives it's the opportunity to give a lot more people the chance to work with this kind of material. And so we initially cast 9 people, and I was intent on making sure it was as diverse a cast as possible. There were 3 white folks in that original cast of 9. We did have a couple of cast changes, whether people who were unable to continue with us for a variety of family reasons. So ultimately, we ended up with a cast of 10, including 4 white folks. But this and her immediately preceding play, Fires in the Mirror, which is about another racial conflict in Crown Heights, New York, are similarly structured and have lent themselves to this multiple cast member production since her one-person shows.
And it's great, obviously, that you're able to integrate more student actors into the performance than just one. Not just because it would be a hugely challenging, project for just one student to do, but obviously having the more students integrated is everything that you can hope for in terms of experience for them. So, Alan, I'd like to talk a little bit about Twilight as an example of verbatim theater. Some of our viewers may not be familiar with that form of theater. Can you tell us what that is and why Anna Deavere Smith chose this unique approach to write the script for Twilight?
Sure. So the verbatim idea is the fact that she had a micro cassette recorder. In fact, I've got my own right here. Back in the day, and recorded every single one of these interviews and carefully transcribed them, not only the words, but the rhythm of it. Anna was particularly interested in rhythm, and I attended the same grad school that Anna did, and she came back and taught a course, so I learned directly from her about her on the road project she was working on just prior to these 2 plays, Fires in the Mirror and Twilight Los Angeles, 1992. And was really interested in the rhythms and how a break in rhythm could reveal character. Similar to the way we sometimes study Shakespeare and that poetry, we use scansion to analyze the rhythms there. And those breaks in rhythm usually mean something important is happening with the character. She was pioneering work on looking at how everyday people in their normal course of speech alter their rhythms and what that reveals about their character. And so that greatly informed how she approached these two projects. And so it's something we worked on in rehearsals about what do these rhythms mean for these characters. A really interesting way to look at the connection between speech and rhythm and character.
That's really fascinating to learn. You know, those beats, those pauses can be just as important as the words themselves. Again, if you're recording somebody, it's funny you held up your micro cassette recorder, because now we all have those in our pockets, right, with our smartphones. But yes, I remember when I was a student journalist in high school, I carried one of those around, and absolutely, it was fun. I always worried about the tapes getting lost or ruined. I think they were back in my parents' house in a closet or something. But the transcriptions of someone's speech can only reveal so much, I think. And as you say, Anna Deavere Smith was a pioneer in terms of the inflections, the beats, the pauses, and that's such an important thing for us to understand, particularly as you said, how normal people talk, right? I can see this kind of analysis having been done in an academic setting for maybe politicians and speeches by famous people. But for us normal everyday people, it probably hadn't been done very much before.
Yeah. And so, you'll notice when you watch the play that there are people who are going to say, and then there are all these stutters and restarts and even mispronunciations that they're written into the script. And these students did an amazing job. Part of it is that they're really instinctive actors. Part of it is that Anna so clearly transcribed it in such a way that you can feel the rhythm as you read it.
So it's interesting. This approach seems to bring even more verisimilitude, right? Because none of us talk in clear sentences. As you say, we have ums, we have uhs, we have pauses, right? And so to have that written there for our actors to then interpret, that's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's great. And there are other playwrights who invent their own. David Mamet has done some of this.
Master of dialogue, without question.
Yeah, you'll see some almost hyper naturalistic versions of this that he and others have attempted, and it's very exciting to play as an actor, I think.
Well, thank you so much, Alan, for the insights on the background to Twilight. I'd like to bring in Aisa and Cory to talk about their experiences as actors. Aisa and Cory, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about Twilight Bay and his story? And then following that, what are your roles in the play, and how did you prepare for this challenging performance? And likewise, if you're playing more than one character, what has that been like? Has it been a challenge? Has it been fun? Let us know.
Yeah. CJ actually played Twilight Bay. You got that.
Yeah, I can speak about Twilight. So obviously he's the person that the play is named after. Twilight was and still to this day is a gang truce activist. He was a large part of the gang truce during this whole situation. And just the idea of him in context of the show is he goes and talks about the idea of being in limbo, that we're kind of stuck in a place that's not the light, but it's not the dark, and in the transitional period. very philosophical in that sense. But then kind of going in, including playing Twilight, I'm playing 6 other characters as well.
You play 7 characters in this play. That's amazing.
Oh.
How do you keep them all straight?
Wait. You go ahead and answer that. I got to count.
Yeah.
How many do you have, Asia?
Um.
You do the math and then
Let's see.
Yeah, keeping track of that many characters is very challenging. But it's also really fun. Because you get to explore a lot. Every character, every one of these characters is so different because they're real people. So as an actor going about that, you get to kind of find what makes each of them unique and what makes them different from each other. Part of that becomes a challenge because you don't want 2 characters to sound too similar or to be too similar, but you want to make sure you're representing who they are. It was challenging, but it was really rewarding to really just kind of deep dive into each of them. For me, I kind of went about it as attacking each of them separately, not worrying about the other 6, and trying to well round each of them before I moved on to the next one.
I'm just imagining you, in your apartment there, switching from character to character to character.
Okay. Physically, I play 5 characters: 4 Black women, 1 Korean man. Mentally, I play 17 characters because
Explain, please.
Maria is one of the jurors, and she has the longest monologue inside the entire script. It's 8 pages long.
8 pages.
And because she is one of the jurors, she actually impersonates the other 7 men and 4 women who were jurors. And so you have to all right, who are these people? What voices do they have? What? It was a time. It was a lot of fun, but it was a time.
She does an amazing job. That particular monologue is a tour de force.
So Asia, many of our viewers may not be familiar with, the kind of practice and rehearsal it takes to do an 8-page monologue. Can you tell us, just what your strategy is for tackling, so many words on a page?
Actually, I did it all backwards.
Really?
That's the way I tend to memorize. I took audition tech last semester, and basically what audition tech is, you pick out 4 or 5 monologues throughout the entire semester, and you have to learn those and present them. So you have 4 or 5 monologues. So when you go out into your career, you have those on the back burner. Well, I'm glad I had that practice.
You're set for your career.
Because when I originally looked at Maria, it's like, oh my God, different voices. And I'm really interested in voice acting. So it's like, wow, this is prime opportunity. And when I started reading through it, it's like, it's a story. And every monologue is a story. But this one in particular, it's so particular in it because certain people say certain things, they act certain ways. You have to actually embody everything inside this monologue. And so what I did was I went to the last page and I started reading it. And then I'd add on another chunk, read through all of that, including what I just read, and I just keep adding on to it. And then after I read through all of it, I add in the characterizations, I add in the character analysis, I do all the work after that. But I tend to read things backwards because it builds in that muscle memory, because after you read through something so many times, it's just there.
Yeah, it becomes rote. It's great to hear your approach. That'll be very informative. Just to follow up with both of you, Asia and CJ, you're both seasoned actors. You've performed a lot. Once a play run is over, once a performance is over, do these characters that you portray, do they stay with you for a while? Are there characters from this play that you inhabited that you think will be with you for a while?
Without a doubt. Yeah, just with the way the play is structured, the meaning of the play, what's going on today, it's not going to leave me for a bit. Especially one of my characters, Elaine Brown, she's an activist for the Black Panther Party, and she's by far one that I connect with the most because I actually embodied one of my aunts into my performance for that one.
Wonderful.
And I just connected so well with her because she's frustrated, she's angry, and at the same time, she doesn't understand why things have to go as violently as they are. She's upset, but there's a better way to go about what's going on right now instead of just going into the street, fighting people, looting things. There's a better solution to everything that's happening right now. And we haven't found that solution. But if we talk through it, we'll be able to find that solution. And yeah, and woo.
That's heavy. CJ, did you want to chime in? Otherwise, Asia provided the perfect segue into our next question. But please go ahead if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, a lot of what Asia said is kind of similar to me too. I think each one of these characters is going to last with me for a long time. They're all, you can learn something from each one of them, regardless of kind of where their character in the arc of the story, if you align with their beliefs or not, you can learn something from that. You know, the one thing I think that I learned from this play more than anything was that it's never as black and white as it sometimes should be, and there's a million shades of gray in between. And learning each of their learning each of these characters' perspectives and how they handle it and what it means to them is just so resonating. But yeah, otherwise Asia covered a lot of the same things that I was thinking. Took the word right out of my mouth.
It's so fascinating to hear that perspective. So thank you for sharing. So to segue, Asia was commenting about the use of violence, and I think that's something we should talk about. So how is violence, from police brutality to looting to rioting, portrayed in Twilight? And what connections can we make between the events of 1992 and last summer's protests for racial justice and criminal justice reform?
It probably shouldn't be my favorite part, but at one point in the recording, Alan set up like a whole bunch of like different stations, like a telephone booth, there was a mailbox, and then a garbage can, and there was a bat on the floor, okay? And there was like a drop mat, and he's like, all right, this is the riot scene. And basically it's like chaos that you see inside the streets day to day. And it's honestly things we shouldn't be used to be seeing, but it's things that you're used to seeing with day-to-day news, day-to-day everything you see. And I understand why it happened, because once you pick up the bat and you just swing it, it's like the frustration leaves you, and it's like in that moment of everything that's going on, everything you feel and see, just getting that small release is what makes it worth it. And at the same time, it's not worth it to go out and just be violent everywhere. But in that moment, in that acting moment, you understand everything that's going on around you just from what you're doing.
As you're saying, it is a release, but it's only a momentary release, right? And so you need to engage in more and more increasing violence, right? So it builds and builds and builds.
Like a snowball.
Yeah.
So the actual portrayal of violence in the play is primarily through archival footage. We'll see some of the beating of Rodney King. We'll see some footage of Latasha Harlan's, which I won't go into, but it's a story that really impacts deeply the setting of the stage for what happened, and some of the conflict between the Black community and the Korean American community. We'll see some historical footage from the 60s. We'll see some footage from 2020, and then some of this will also be intercut with what Asia described, just very quick clips of some of the stuff I had the actors do.
I think it's important to consider how the violence is important in the understanding of what happens. Even for the violence that occurred this summer, students would be calling and people in the community would be debating, is this something we should do? Is violence the way to make change? Or is there some other way for action to make an impact upon what is going on in our nation? And students would call and say, there's violence and rioting going on in the community I'm in. I don't know if I should participate. I think I shouldn't. And they were saying some of their friends would say you should participate, or they were angry and fighting between themselves whether it should be violence or not. So I think it's real important for people to be able to observe what occurs within this play, compare it even between now, and that would be helpful for them to process what is going on during this time as well as what's happened 20 years ago. I think that's an important part of this play.
Thank you so much, Stacie. So how can the visual arts, especially theater, help to bring attention to issues of social justice? Aren't the arts meant to be entertainment?
I've always had an issue with the idea that the arts are supposed to be entertainment. I enjoy my encounters with the arts, whether I am being titillated by funny, silly things, or whether I'm being deeply engaged and making discoveries. I think when we come into the theater in particular, I think if we can excite our empathy and walk away with discoveries of understanding about ourselves, about others, about our relationships, that is thrilling to me, regardless of whether it's come through comedy or tragedy or something else. That's what excites me. So is that entertainment for me? I don't know, but I think when we come to gather in a theater, we are all seeking some level of communion with each other in that space. And for me, it's those discoveries of understanding that I take away and that I value so much.
Thank you so much, Alan. Asia or CJ, as actors, do you have thoughts on the use of theater as a means to bring attention to social justice?
Yeah, going off what Alan says, I've also never been a huge fan of the idea that the theater and the arts are just meant for entertainment. I think a large part of your experience with art is getting a stimulation, getting something out of it, whether that be a good laugh or a good cry. Or I think what this play does a lot too is it makes you think. It really makes you self-assess how we are. And it was 1992, and we're all this year later, and like we talked about earlier, there are a lot of unsettling similarities that not a ton has necessarily changed. And I think theater especially is very good at kind of bringing you into the world and bringing it to you, and not just showing you or telling you, but as an audience member, you're pulled into it. You are just as much a part of that as we as actors are. And I think that can really lead to people walking away thinking.
CJ and Asia, you are doing a great job of providing amazing segues to the next questions. But I wanted to see if Asia wanted to chime in on this current one before we move to our penultimate question.
Yeah, a lot of what CJ and Alan said too. It's everybody goes to the theater for something, like whether you're watching a musical because you love music, or if you go see a comedy because you just want to laugh, or a satiric comedy where you want to laugh at somebody else's pain so you don't have to feel your own. It's all the same thing. Yeah. And even for a play like this, with social injustice right now, everybody's going to come see the show for something. And it's because we're experiencing things that are happening inside this play right now. So even though some forms of theater are entertainment, some forms of theater aren't just entertainment. It's a life lesson. It's finding something you love. It's finding something you didn't know. Theater is a lot more than just entertainment. And that's, I think, why we all fell in love with it in the first place.
Without question. So this play confronts a traumatic national experience and will be challenging for some viewers. What does Twilight ask of its audience? Is it a call to action?
I think it is. I would like to hear what Alan has to say about it, but I think that as someone who is viewing, who goes to the theater for education and to have a moment where you go into the actors are the ones bringing you into that emotion. And it brings you to the concept of what happened, helps you to recognize it rather than seeing it in script or passively watching TV. And then hopefully it will bring people to action. They'll understand where they have been inactive and see where they need to become more active.
This may be a bit of a semantic quibble, but I'm not sure it's necessarily a call to action on its own. I think it might inspire a call to action within someone, and I think that's really the most important call to action is that which comes from inside us. I think it is a call to listen with empathy, to seek understanding, and to grapple with complexity, and I think we might hope that would inspire each person who engages with it to their own call to action.
I feel like I'm a little in the middle. As an actress, you learn not to be biased with the acts, with not the actors, the characters that you see. Because even while you're playing a specific character, you can't put yourself inside that character because you aren't that character, especially in this moment where all of these characters are actual people. So even if you're acting a police officer, you can't be like, oh no, I'm a bad person, I'm a police officer, because he doesn't think that way. So I think not necessarily a call to action, but yes, a call to action that there are different viewpoints. And especially with this play, you get to see all those viewpoints, you get to see everything that led up to what happened, all the factors that intertwined, and you can put two and two together, like this happened because this happened. And so if we apply that to today, if we can do this and not have this happen, we can find a solution, or maybe we can do this or change this time so this won't happen. I think I don't know the word for it, but I'm just like right in the middle.
Yeah, for me, I don't think I would call this a call to action. I see it as a hope that we spark something, that we incite something in someone or a group of people they can take away, and we can keep the chain going and get people to start reflecting on it. And I don't think any of us are asking for this play to just automatically change everything and for everyone to automatically just go and go have that call to action. But I think it's a step in the direction of people to start understanding. I think, especially as an actor, I think we're asking the audience to not just watch and hear what we're saying, but to listen and understand what is going on in the kind of the bigger picture, and not just what's happening with each word we say.
If I can follow up on that, it's interesting that the first act begins and ends with Jesse Norman, an opera singer who Aisa plays so beautifully. The second act is bookended by the great academic Cornel West, and then by Twilight Bay. And Cornel West opens the second act talking about these liminal spaces, and then Twilight brings it back to the space of twilight, that borderline space. And I think Twilight himself is a symbol of, if not reconciliation, at least truce. And that idea of seeking understanding and seeking common ground, even if you're not going to ultimately agree, that you can find peace and find agreement on some level. So the play is structured so beautifully, and so that's just informing for me this whole discussion.
You all keep providing amazing segues, so thank you for doing the hard work. So our final question for our wonderful panelists. Thank you, all of you, Alan, Stacie, Aisa, and CJ, for joining me today. So I'd like us to conclude with Rodney King's own words from May 1st, 1992. On the third day of writing, King appealed to the public to stop the looting and rioting. He said, "People, I just want to say, can't we all get along? Can't we all get along?" Are the solutions to racial inequality and social justice as simple as the questions that Rodney King asked?
I think it is more complicated than getting along. Unless getting along you define as including restorative justice, because I think, just not being actively anti-racist is not sufficient, and that might be one definition of just getting along. A lot more has to be done. Demands to be done.
Equity is another piece. Equity, we can get along and not have equity, just tolerance or indifference even. But equity actually is a movement towards more than getting along, but actually being equal and having the opportunities that each other has. And so long, but we want to go further than that.
Yeah.
I feel like up until this point, we've been trying to get along, but then that leads into microaggressions and colorism and sexism and a lot of other things that are deep-seated that don't really get worked out, and it just builds on itself. And then fear comes into that, and once one group fears another, then that imbalances everything again. And then we have situations like we're in right now where we thought we were supposed to get along, but then we come to find out that we've never really been getting along. We've just been tolerating each other.
Yeah, I don't think it's as simple as just getting along. I think there needs to be more than that. You can't, with just getting along, like Aisa pointed out, that can lead to a bunch of other problems, including microaggression, colorism. It's not that simple. We need to push for an understanding to help each other and open our minds to change. And it may take time, but as long it'll be worth it when everyone can have that equity.
Well, thank you again to our wonderful panelists, Alan Kopischke, Cory J. O'Donnell, Aisa Rogers, and Stacie Christian. Thank you for watching. To our viewers who have already seen Twilight, we hope that you enjoyed the show. For those of you who watched this discussion before engaging with Twilight, please enjoy the show. I'm Eric Morgan, your moderator for this panel discussion. Thank you for joining us.